You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast with George Galloway.
What a week it has been. Berserk, bonkers, sleazy Joe Biden has gone haywire on television. We've seen the videos of him wandering around lost. We even saw when he came to England for an important summit meeting, him attempting, apparently, to walk off a pier into the sea, saved only by his good wife, who turned him round and marched him back in a landward direction. We've seen him utterly unable to read out the words on his auto cues. We've seen him misspeak and misstate names, dates, and places, and even confuse his sister for his wife. But this week saw perhaps the worst of all Joe Biden's. Take a quick look at this.
The impact, what happened on July the 6th, had international repercussions beyond what I think any of you can fully understand. The impact, what happened on July the 6th, had international repercussions beyond what I think any of you can fully understand.
Well, I don't know if that's a Botox nightmare or whether it's a plastic surgery meltdown or whether it's some kind of stroke, but Joe Biden is in no fit state to run America, even less to run the world, even less to run a world at war. Joe Biden thinks that events in Washington happened not on January the 6th, but on July the 6th. And he thinks that it had international repercussions that none of us can understand, when in fact, in comparison to a weekday sojourn down the Champs-Élysées in France with a yellow vest on, it was a minor skirmish of people in buffalo hats and red Indian regalia trying to get through unlocked doors with the complicity of the security state, as is now becoming clear. Joe, it was January the 6th, not July the 6th, and it had no international ramifications at all. And whatever happened to your face? I'm not being unkind. I have said many times that this is elder abuse. His family, his party, his government is actually engaging in cruelty towards an elderly man no longer in control of his faculties or his bowels, as His Holiness the Pope found in the Vatican towards the end of last year. This is a man who sleeps with the nuclear football. He sleeps with a bag that contains the nuclear codes that could send thermonuclear intercontinental ballistic missiles into orbit, into action. He is the man that can bring humanity on this planet to a complete halt, a complete destruction of every living being and thing on this planet. Let's just hope he doesn't confuse the nuclear codes for his alarm clock. Let's just hope that stumbling in a hurry to get to his hourly visit to the lavatory, he doesn't trip over that nuclear football. This is a clear and present danger to the safety and peace of the world, never mind to the good governance of the United States of America. But even when he's not on screen, the things he's saying are increasingly unhinged. This week, he accused Iran of fueling the war in Ukraine because it is selling to Russia the drone technology that is being used in the war. But Joe Biden has sent $112 billion to fuel the war in Ukraine. Not only that, he sent Boris Johnson as his secret weapon to stop Zelensky from bringing the war to a close nearly 8 months ago. Joe Biden is the man who is fueling the war in Ukraine. It's Biden and America and NATO, not Iran, that are fueling the war. How come NATO is allowed to send hundreds of billions of dollars and euros of weapons into the war in Ukraine, but Iran cannot sell drones to one of the belligerents in that war in Ukraine? What's the thinking behind that? What's the logic when you decide to make a statement like that? Have you no self-awareness at all? Are you allowed to send any weapons to anybody, but other people are not allowed to send weapons to anybody? Russia and Iran are partners. They have mutual defense responsibilities. They have treaty obligations. They are close relations. Why would one not be allowed to give weapons to the other when you are allowed to give all the weapons that the military-industrial complex can produce? What's the thinking behind a statement like that? I'll tell you what the thinking is. Have you noticed, as I just have, that they have stopped talking about RTP? It's a while since you've heard it, so I'll refresh your memory. RTP was the doctrine devised by Tony Blair and Bill Clinton. What a couple, what a gruesome twosome. That they used, the doctrine that they used to attack Yugoslavia. They couldn't get an attack on Yugoslavia through the United Nations Security Council, so they invented a new set of rules, which they later called the Rules-Based International Order. You don't hear anything about that now either. The RTP stood for Right to Protect, by which any country had the right to arrogate to itself the right to protect any other people under attack or under threat of attack. That's the basis on which Britain and the United States and NATO got involved in the war in Yugoslavia, to protect people that they themselves defined as being in need of protection. Why don't they use that doctrine anymore? Because, of course, Russia would have the right to protect its co-religionists, its co-compatriots, its Russian-speaking people in the east of Ukraine. Indisputably, according to the Council of Europe, according to all of the international observers, under ceaseless attack from the regime in Kiev since 2014. 14,000 people were killed. Would Russia not have a right to protect them under the Clinton-Blair doctrine of RTP? Of course they would. And therefore, they stopped talking about it. The rules-based international order, ditto, because the rules-based international order includes the right to protect. In other words, to step outside of international law, outside of the UN Security Council, and take unilateral or bilateral or multilateral action wherever you decide that the rules you have devised are being broken. Now, of course, it's all going disastrously wrong. I've just seen the front page of The Economist. I can't bear to open it. But the front page of The Economist still maintains, on this day of all days, that Ukraine can win the war against Russia. On the day that a Russian private military company the Wagner Group, defeated NATO in the city of Solidar and is now, right now, mopping up in the catacombs of that city. That ancient city of salt has now fallen not to the Russian armed forces, they're not even fighting there, but to a Russian mercenary group of private military contractors. That's how badly the war is going for Ukraine and for NATO. And of course, with the fall of Solidar, ineluctably comes the fall of Bakhmut, another ancient city riddled with catacombs, underground tunnels, in which a fight to the death is this evening occurring. So much so that the head of the Ukrainian military has pleaded with President Zelensky to withdraw, if they can, from the kettle in which they are trapped in Bakhmut, for fear of losing thousands of their soldiers on top of the 100,000 according to von der Leyen, or more according to credible military sources, that they have already lost. And Zelensky has refused his own army chief's demand that the soldiers be withdrawn from the noose in which they currently are poised. And as somebody, I think Colonel McGregor, just pointed out on social media a few minutes ago, Zelensky will be lucky, long before the Russians come, if the armed forces of Ukraine don't deal with him, if his own generals don't deal with him, because while he is cavorting on the stage of the Golden Globes, they are dying in the most unimaginable horror. Don't look at the videos I've looked at. I beg you, don't look at these young Ukrainian men giving their lives for a coke-sniffing, cross-dressing, porn actor, billionaire, cavorting with his film star friends in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, at the Golden Globes. Speaking of golden, let me bring up Gordon Brown. We call him Goldfinger because he was such a financial wizard. He sold most of Britain's gold reserves at the bottom of the gold market. He was a wizard, as the Iron Chancellor, to be sure. Now, it pains me to say what I'm going to say, because I have literally known Gordon Brown well since both of us were teenagers. I was his chairman of the Scottish Labour Party. I was 26, he was 28. I have been in politics with him for 50 years. I like him as a person, despite all of our political differences. I respect his intellect, but his grasp of reality, his grasp of self-awareness has clearly now entirely deserted him, because just this day he set out a whole manifesto of putting Putin on trial in a Nuremberg-style tribunal for the crime of making aggressive war. But Gordon Brown was effectively the number 2 in Tony Blair's government, who paid for the entire bill of Britain's aggressive war, illegal, unprovoked war against Iraq, never mind against Afghanistan before it, never mind against Yugoslavia before it. Gordon Brown is as guilty as anyone on the earth of the war crime, the ultimate crime of launching aggressive war as defined by the Nuremberg Tribunal. So if Vladimir Putin should be on trial, Gordon, what about you? Why wouldn't you also be on trial? Your war was illegal, according to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan. Putin's war is not illegal. It is legal to come to the defense of your compatriots under attack in a territory next door to you. That's what happened with Vietnam and Pol Pot. That's what happened with Tanzania and Idi Amin. And that's what happened in Kosovo, Gordon. It is not unprovoked to launch an attack on a country that is killing your compatriots, but it is unprovoked to invade and occupy Iraq in defiance of a decision of the Security Council of the United Nations. Iraq did not pose a threat to Britain or America or any of its neighbors. It did not have weapons of mass destruction, but you invaded it, and you are co-responsible for the deaths of 1 million people in Iraq, and you want to put Putin on trial? Gordon, pipe down. Go off and do good works in Africa. Stop drawing attention to the most grotesque blunders and crimes of which you yourself are guilty as sin, as guilty as any sin ever denounced by your father in that pulpit in Kirkcaldy. And you know it. It's written in every line on your increasingly haunted face. I've only got a minute to tell you that the rally, No to NATO, No to War, in central London on the 25th of February, for which 1,019 people had registered to attend, has been cancelled without explanation by the church in which it was supposed to be held. I don't know who is responsible for the cancellation, but we will find out in the court, because we have begun the necessary legal action to secure compensation for the expenditure we had already made and for the loss of income that we would have made from that event. I'm talking transatlantic airplane tickets, Reverend. I'm talking European and domestic rail fares, Reverend. I'm talking hotel bills, Reverend. I'm talking lost book sales, Reverend. I'm talking all kinds of costs that are going to mount to many thousands of pounds that you will have to pay me, either before we get to court or in the court. And if we are in the court, we'll be able, through the process of discovery, to learn exactly how an event about which you knew everything in advance, when you took our money in advance, came to be cancelled. You were told in writing who would be speaking at the rally. You were told in writing the subject that would be discussed at the rally. You have no legal leg to stand on. You have breached a written, paid contract with us, and it's going to cost you dearly. Not to mention the blow to your reputation as the flagship liberal branch of the Church of England, just off the Euston Road. Flagship liberal? Really? You, Reverend, have been got at. Whether you were got at by the government, or got at by a foreign government, or got at by the agents of our government or a foreign government, or got at by the low-life hordes, the black hundreds that infest with their excremental pro-war propaganda? I don't know. But as I say, we'll find out unless you settle well in advance. We've got a poll running. Thousands of people have voted on it, and it doesn't look great for you, Sleazy Joe. Is Joe Biden dangerously demented? He's dangerous, that's obvious. He's demented, equally obvious. But is he now dangerously demented is the question. On Twitter, it is yes, 68%, no, 32%. Who are these 32% is what I'm asking myself. But on YouTube, it's yes, 94%, no, 6%. And on Telegram, it's yes, 94%, no, 6%. So the overwhelming majority of respondents so far think that the President of the United States, the most powerful man on the planet, is dangerously demented. My next guest knew him well. So well, he sexually assaulted her. Not that you have been able to learn the grisly details of that, because it turns out in the Twitter files and other recent revelations that Tara Reid's testimony was targeted by the American security state so that the allegations would not become widely enough known to affect the outcome of the presidential election in 2020. Just another example of electoral interference, not by a foreign government, but by the American deep state itself in US democracy. But she's a woman with a good and stout heart who has refused to be silenced. And one of the places she has regularly been able to talk is here on the mother of all talk shows. And I am very glad to say she joins us again now. Tara, before we return to your personal knowledge of Joe Biden, and I promise you we will, let me take you to that video that I showed at the beginning of the show, where Biden appears the most demented yet of many demented videos. His face falling like waxwork melting, his diction almost indecipherable, and his recollection of events confusing January the 6th with July the 6th, becoming such that if the 25th Amendment of the US Constitution is not under active consideration by his cabinet, then God help us all. What did you think of the latest Joe Biden?
Well, there's so many, but there you have it. He's not cognitively, obviously, present. They recently, I believe it was yesterday, he was in Mexico City and was talking about, he was being questioned about files that were discovered, Ukraine among them, that were actually classified in a locked closet of a think tank. Now, CNN is doing their spin and trying to softball it, but he became very confused about these files and couldn't answer the question and said he has a lot of classified files. Well, in the US law, you're not a representative of the government is not supposed to have classified documents off-site or without clearance and that kind of thing. And at the time, he was the vice president, so he shouldn't have had them at all. But one of those files is on Ukraine, interestingly enough, around 2014. So there you have it. I mean,
I was going to ask you about these files, Tara, because here we have, there was a gigantic hue and cry and an FBI raid on the private residence of the former President Trump over his alleged possession of documents that should never have been taken out of the White House. And now we have the head of the government that ordered that raid on Mar-a-Lago, caught in his think tank with documents not only that shouldn't have been brought out of the White House, but which he, as the then vice president, should not even have been in possession of at all.
Exactly. And the way that the corporate US media is handling it, or the Western media, is really what's significant here, George. I mean, they're trying to spin it as not a big deal. They made a huge deal out of Donald Trump, and members of the Democratic Party were calling for all kinds of punishments for Donald Trump. And now that it's Joe Biden, there's a lot of backpedaling and, of course, hypocrisy. But what's really notable about all of this is the weaponization of the intelligence community, the DOJ, the CIA, the FBI, and the collusion with social media and media to shape the narrative. And so that's one example of how they're trying to shape a narrative or suppress a story, spin it out the way they want, instead of just presenting the facts and letting people know the information. So we are definitely in an information war, because they are trying to push the proxy war against Russia via Ukraine and the billions of dollars that they're spending. And as you know, the US just passed a bill for $858 billion to go to the defense budget alone, which is the largest in history. In fact, next year, if they raise it at the same rate, it will be $1 trillion towards defense. We're spending 5 times the amount of any other country in the world, in some cases, on defense. And so, yes, so you mentioned my story. My story was among many that were suppressed and censored. The DOJ actually took my communications under sealed warrants. Why, I don't know. I'm a regular citizen. I came forward about what happened to me when I worked for Joe Biden as an aide. And for that, to punish me or scare me, they've let me know, so to speak, that I'm surveilled and I'm, under the microscope. So US citizens shouldn't have to face this mass surveillance, mass censorship, mass suppression. Also that a political party, or let's just say neoliberals, right? Because it's the Western world, trying to push their agenda and their economic gains and lining their pockets. And you mentioned Ukraine early in your show. And to give an example, Lockheed Martin, right? And some of the bigger corporations like Raytheon, together, those companies have made almost $1 trillion since last February. So, of course, there's this economic incentive to keep this war going. The U.S. has just pivoted from Afghanistan to Ukraine. And meanwhile, U.S. citizens are suffering. We have 41% inflation. A dozen eggs, George, are $8 American dollars now in your average thing. Fuel is as out of the charts. And I know that Great Britain is suffering as well, and other European countries. So you have all of this suffering happening while these weapons manufacturers are lining their pockets. And they're weaponizing social media to craft their message, censor, control. And so when important things come up, like Biden's hiding, classified files in a locked closet, right, of a think tank, or the Hunter Biden laptop, which was a valid story, New York Post was actually, suppressed. So it's really a dangerous time that we live in. And who's winning are the neoliberal and neocon hawks. Unfortunately, they're warmongering.
Well, it's a dangerous time, not least because the people who used to be a bulwark against the overweening state, the creep of censorship, the dark actors of the security forces of all kinds, are now its most enthusiastic supporters. So we now have a situation where the so-called liberals, so-called progressives, so-called Democrats are the biggest enemies of democracy and free speech and holding government to account. That's what's truly new and dangerous about this situation, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, just the example of the way the Twitter files have unrolled, right, to reveal this collusion between DOJ and FBI. Former FBI agents and former DOJ were working at Twitter in executive positions. They were calling each other, deciding who was going to be suppressed, what story was going to be censored, and having these conversations. Meanwhile, Jack Dorsey testified before Congress and lied basically because he said shadow banning wasn't happening and censoring wasn't happening. Well, it was. And now the Twitter files are proving just how cozy that relationship was. Not only that, but the FBI paid $3 million for some of the information. So they're not only harvesting information, right, about users, consumers of these social media platforms, but they're censoring them and also making sure that their political candidate, in this case, it was Joe Biden's campaign and the Democrats, were amplified, and Republicans, for instance, were suppressed. That's very dangerous indeed. That's shaping elections. That's changing the course of the history of the world. And now here we are. And I got into a lot of trouble, as you know, George Galloway, in 2020, when I said, if Joe Biden becomes president, he will try to take us to war to Russia. And here we are. We're almost at World War III. I mean, I think it was last week, they've put orders down that now Ukrainian soldiers are going to be trained in the United States at military sites, trained to use weapons and sent back. So, I mean, they're saying that it's a proxy war, right? But I think we were approaching now a hot war, and we're even closer to World War III. But the voices of citizens, American, European, that are trying to say, we don't want war, we don't want this, we're being silenced and censored all over.
Well, Jack was either lying to Congress or things were happening in his company that he didn't know about. That is, of course, possible, though doesn't reflect well on him. But the new ownership of Twitter has opened at least some of these sinister cabinets and revealed all kinds of horrific things, some of which you've referred to. Tell us what happened this week, because I saw your name come up. What did you discover about what they had been doing to you?
Well, apparently Twitter, I knew about this a little because a Twitter attorney from Perkins Coie had reached out to me and said, I made a motion in court because it was a sealed document that my communications, everything had been taken under sealed warrants. And he said, assume this isn't just Twitter, this is everything, email, everything. And I said, okay, and but there wasn't much to do. You can try to quash, but when you're up against the DOJ, you can't. They impaneled a grand jury, and to this day, I don't know why it's sealed. My attorney tried to find out. Investigative reporters have tried to find out. It is simply pending. So it's been pending. So apparently, according to a reporter, one of the reasons that the Biden campaign wanted the DOJ to surveil me was they wanted to find out what journalists were covering my story. So that's one theory. I don't know if that's fact. That was the theory that was presented.
Whatever happened to the Me Too mantra that women must be believed? You are a living, breathing example of a woman that was not only not believed, but whose allegations were actively suppressed, therefore.
Yeah, you know, when it happened, when I worked for Joe Biden, I went through protocol. I didn't go public. And I was very quiet about it, as you know, because we've had this conversation for a long, long time. I went through the proper protocols, but it was never properly investigated ever. So when I came forward in 2019 is when 8 other women came forward. As you mentioned, I thought the Me Too movement would be there for me. Wow, it wasn't. It's there for anyone accusing a Republican in the United States. But if you're accusing a neoliberal, they seem to go for the hills, right? And I think the only reason that Cuomo was brought to heel was because of the nursing home scandal and because there was a criminal investigation that resulted in him being able to be thrown under the bus. They were done with Cuomo. With Biden, you know, he's still being propped up. And, you know, you mentioned at the top of our discussion here about his possible dementia. I don't know, I'm not a medical doctor, but his cognitive abilities obviously are quite questioned by a lot of people. But it's the people around him that are dangerous, you know, and it's particularly when we're this close to possible World War III, when they're talking about limited nuclear war, and they're actually having conversations. Like, I keep hoping that there are people that I knew years ago that are back behind the scenes working for peace, but there aren't. if you look at who makes up some of those jobs, it's a very, a group of people that are very enriched. So I call them, the predator class, the predator elite class, right? They're lining their pockets right now. They'll take the war to just so much of a brink and then try to pull back. But, we're learning a lot, George. Like, for instance, we've learned that there was a memo, right, saying that NATO wasn't going to expand. That got released in FOIA, in Freedom of Information Act. There was an agreement with Gorbachev back with the Soviet Union that the NATO was not going to expand its borders. And for the last 2 decades, it has. It's expanded to the point where it's presented an existential threat to Russia. Of course, they're protecting their borders. And as you mentioned, they're protecting the 14,000 people that were murdered. They're protecting their families and other people and Russian nationals there in the Donbass region. And, but in our media, in the Western media, they're denying that there's Nazis in Ukraine. There's denying that there's a kill website, a Ukrainian kill site, which has 337 children on it. I've spoken to one of them, Faina, who is on a kill site where 12 journalists have been killed. And once someone's killed, they put liquidated. They dox these people. They have journalists. I think Roger Waters is on that website. And I've been told some others. So, but Western media won't cover it. So again, we're just being lied to as citizens. And, I actually shared, it's so interesting, George, I shared your speech that you gave in Congress today. I shared it when you were talking about Iraq. Because that was such a powerful speech that you gave when you called out the senators in the US back then about them lying about weapons of mass destruction and all that. And here we are, we're reliving those lies again, all to benefit the military.
Indeed so, indeed we are. And Henry Kissinger's outfit this day released now indisputable evidence that the United States did promise Gorbachev that NATO would not expand 1 inch east of Germany.
That's what I was referring to. Yeah.
This, of course, was a verbal promise. Gorbachev was too flattered and stupid to get it in copper-bottomed writing, but it was a clear promise nonetheless, as Kissinger has made clear this day.
Yeah. And there's been plenty of memos and discussions about this. I mean, the fact that NATO should have been dissolved. I mean, it should be dissolved. There's no reason. But there you have it. We have NATO, and it's become this arm of the U.S. military-industrial complex, and it's just generating income for the people that benefit from that, sadly. And the people that suffer are civilians and your working class people everywhere.
Civilians and the poor bloody infantry being killed in Bakhmut and in Solidar at this very hour. Last question. It's a difficult one, Tara. If you don't want to answer it, feel free to decline. But you told us in 2019 that Joe Biden was not a fit and proper person to be the president of the United States because of your own personal experience with him. When do you think this cognitive decline that is evident now to everyone, when do you think that set in?
It's hard to say. I mean, that's a good question. I mean, actually, a lot of people noticed it on the campaign trail. They kept him pretty, it was COVID, so there was the joke about him being in the basement, but there was a reason why they didn't have him out and about very much, because he had a tendency to be, to not have very good filters. So I think the first sign was just the filters being dropped. But of course, at the time that I knew him, he was at the height of his senatorial power. He was younger and he was quite fit. So there were no cognitive, he wasn't the most brilliant guy. He was known to be, kind of and you were in politics long enough, you probably heard, he wasn't an intellectual giant at all. He wasn't like a learned politician. He was more, in it for the glory of it, I guess, if you will. But the signs really showed even on the campaign trail. You'd see him lose his temper, things like that with constituents. It was there. People just, the machine, the Biden campaign machine was just in operation, and they kept it going. So now, you know.
Tara Reid, thanks for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Always a pleasure to see you. Thank you. Is Joe Biden dangerously demented? Is the poll on my Twitter, on my YouTube channel, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm on 236,000 subscribers now, but I'm determined this year to get to 250,000. Please do me that favor. It will cost you nothing. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. And Telegram, that's t.me/George Galloway. And the poll is going big time, and it's overwhelmingly stating that most people overwhelmingly regard Joe Biden as dangerously demented. Let me take a short break.
The 1897 edition of War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Read by George Galloway. Available only on Patreon.
The cylinder was artificial, hollow, with an end that screwed out. Something within the cylinder was unscrewing the top. Good heavens, said Ogilvy. There's a man in it, men in it, half roasted to death, trying to escape. At once, with a quick mental leap, he linked the thing with the flash on Mars. The thought of the confined creature was so dreadful to him that he forgot the heat and went forward to the cylinder to help turn. But luckily, the dull radiation arrested him before he could burn his hands on the still glowing metal.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows with George Galloway.
That was me reading The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. I'm not Orson Welles, but I'm the next best thing. The best living practitioner of the spoken word, as someone described me on Twitter today. And that can be found on my Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. Now, phone lines. Manuel is in Brazil. Let's hear from him. Manuel, tell us what's happening on the streets of Brazil. Some disturbing developments there over the weekend.
Yeah, hi George. I hope you're doing well today. As you saw, the events on Sunday were totally disgraceful. There are reports of people peeing and defecating in the presidential palace. They destroyed everything they saw on their way. They also stole pieces of art and guns and whatever they could take. So as a result, like many people are comparing it to what happened 2 years ago in the United States. Now, I know like Jimmy Dore, he supposed that it was an inside job, orchestrated mainly by the FBI. First of all, I would like to ask you if do you think there are like deep state forces behind what happened in Brazil? Now, because there are like also similarities in the sense that the governor of Brasilia is an associate and an ally from Jair Bolsonaro, and the security chief of Brasilia, he was on vacations in Florida at the same time. So, like, what a coincidence. Now, I also know that you know Lula. So, that's my second question. What do you think that Lula should do about it? Because if he goes too harsh on these people, that is just going to further the divide in this society, which is just like one side of the population wants a democracy, and the other half, or like less than half, wants just a military government. So what can be done about it? Because if he goes too harsh, it's going to further this division. But if he's too weak, he might then lose grip on power. And my final question for you: what do you think Bolsonaro is going to do now? He's in Florida, but now he said he was sick, like stomach pain or something, and he's hospitalized. That's also a coincidence. And I understand that he wants to apply for citizenship in Brazil because his grandparent or great-grandparent was Italian. But now I saw that Meloni was condemning the event, so she's like a very poker face. You don't know which way she's gonna go.
No, I mean, I wouldn't be in a position to give Lula any advice on this. It's far too sensitive a matter, and I'm not in possession of all the facts. But the fact that Bolsonaro flew to the United States and is now in hospital in the United States, perhaps to give himself some distance between events that are occurring on the ground in Brazil, is a deeply worrying development. On the other hand, Lula does appear still to have the support of the judiciary, which once imprisoned him, and still to have the support of the institutions, including the armed forces in Brazil. As long as those two things remain the case, then one expects that with the mass support of just over half of the people in Brazil, Lula can hold on. But he should place his ultimate faith in the people. He should mobilize the people of Brazil. He should mobilize and organize the people of Brazil to defend democracy in the country in case any of those current factors begin to loosen. Manuel, thanks for bringing us up to date on that. Rafael is in Vermont in the United States. Let's hear from him. Rafa, go ahead.
Hey guys, always a pleasure to be a participant in this show. I did a few research today, so I can put what is happening right now into context. I want everybody to understand the war in Ukraine is over as far Russia is concerned. It's over. They did everything they're supposed to do, and the rest of the war. Now, if the United States keep on acting up that way in NATO, Russia gonna start going after them. Russia is in no mood to keep on playing around. So what I want everybody to understand, once Gettysburg happened and the Confederate lost Gettysburg, the war is over. So the Union just sat there, so Lee knew this war is over. You need to start working a way so we can end this. So that game we are playing right now, is, I want everybody to understand what is happening. The United States, Joe Biden is a Dixiecrat. This man, he thinks he can treat Russia the same way the Israelis are treating the Palestinians, where no matter what, we are the power, we're going to tell you what to do. And they take Russia is the Palestinians. And they are sadly mistaken because Russia is a superpower. The Russians know it. The Russians had 4 wars to observe, to learn, to study everything about the United States and to prepare for this conflict. I want everybody is saying one thing, what the American will do, what NATO will do. Putin, in his speech, he made it clear for you. Understand the word Putin used. He said the American people like to intimidate people. You know when a military person tell you like to intimidate? So it's a way for him to tell you, I know you don't want to fight me. I know you cannot fight me. And if you mess around, we're going to come after you. Russia is not afraid to fight.
That's right, Rafael. As Stoltenberg said in his valedictory address, the NATO powers have emptied their inventories for Ukraine. As I joked the other day, if Russia wanted to, which of course it doesn't, there is nothing to stop them marching all the way to Berlin again. There is nothing to stop them overrunning all of these barking, yapping minor NATO powers. But luckily for all of us, they have no wish or intention of doing that. Because if they did keep their tanks rolling all the way to Berlin, we simply don't have the weapons, the materiel, and above all, the ammunition to stop them. So the war is over in that sense, but not in the sense that the suffering has stopped. As I said earlier, I've been watching videos this evening of really horrific carnage that is continuing. Even now in Solidar, which has fallen, and now in Bakhmut, which is soon to fall. The suffering of the Ukrainian soldiers, never mind the suffering of the Ukrainian people who don't have electricity, don't have water in this bitter, cold Russian winter, is truly heartbreaking, at least for someone who cares about the people of Ukraine, as I do and always have. And as most people now supporting Ukraine, who never gave it a moment's thought before, definitely haven't. China is, of course, the rising sun in the world, and it is rising in the East, and rising at a particularly early hour. To come on our show this evening is Li Jingjing, the famous Chinese broadcaster and journalist, and a big favorite, I can assure you, Li Jingjing, with the mother of all talk shows viewers. Thanks for not just being here, but looking so fabulous at this early hour. Tell us, I made the point earlier that you'd think with everything that's going on in Eastern Europe that they'd be laying off China at least for a while. But that isn't so. Tell us.
First, thank you for your wonderful introduction about me, George. Always so happy to be here. So yeah, like China looks like we had a joke. Like China is like the United States like a jealous ex. When he look at different parts of the world having a relationship with China, they feel so jealous, and apparently China is always on their mind. They attack China on almost on every issue, but most recently we know is the COVID, China lifting COVID restrictions. It's on almost all major Western mainstream media. It's so hilarious. So I've recently recovered from COVID and back to work very well. And but the thing is, when I look at all these headlines on this Western mainstream media, it really gives me a headache. The headache is much worse than COVID. For example, what we are seeing now is once again the flip-flop of tactics of this several Western mainstream media attacking China. They went from those who were crazily attacking China's strict COVID policies and lockdowns, and now suddenly pretending they care about how Chinese people will be affected by the COVID after China eased the restrictions.
I was just writing about this today. When China had the strictest lockdown and anti-COVID measures, they were denounced as tyrannical, authoritarian, accused of bricking people in their houses and so on. Now that China has lifted most of its COVID restrictions, having secured a COVID outcome better than any country in the whole world, China is being attacked for recklessly lifting the very COVID restrictions that were denounced in the first place.
Exactly. I was like, make up your mind, you people. Like, you went from, oh, your draconian COVID policy is damaging people's living standards. And now they're like, oh, you're just going to let the COVID rip? It's like, what do you want? The thing is, the way they attack China may has a U-turn, but what didn't change is their consistent, continuous anti-China tactic. And this damned if you do, damn it if you don't attitude once again proved these several Western media, politicians, commentators don't care about whether COVID truly affects Chinese people's lives. They're just using it as an excuse to further paint China as an evil country. And their negative reporting on China has gone absolutely absurd. I can give you an example. The recent opinion piece published by Wall Street Journal, the headline is COVID is China's prize for rejoining humanity. Rejoining humanity. Since when were we not part of humanity? They basically kicked us out of humanity because we took strict COVID measures to protect our people. And such a racist headline towards Chinese people, I don't know who greenlighted that at the Wall Street Journal, but this kind of racist headlines targeting Chinese people are not rare. I think this kind of racist terms referring to any race in the world cannot be tolerated, but it's suddenly okay when it's describing Chinese people as the evil force. So, and don't forget, I think this is I want to mention this bill because blaming China is a really big and a very well-paid industry. Not only those journalists, commentators can get a lot of views just bad-mouthing China. And in 2021, the United States Senate of the United States passed a bill called Counter-Chinese Influence Act. And that bill authorized a countering Chinese influence fund, which allocates $300 million for each fiscal year from 2022 to 2026 to counter the malign influence of the Chinese Communist Party globally. I don't know what malign influences they're referring to, like lifting people out of poverty, building infrastructures, roads, ports for other countries. And they also use that money to train local journalists across the world to read negative stories about Chinese businesses under the Belt and Road Initiative, and also create some chaos, like organize a certain protests in front of Chinese companies globally. And they even mentioned the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, by name in that bill. You can Google it, you can find that bill in the website of Senate of the United States. So apparently attacking China is their businesses. It doesn't matter what we do. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. You're evil no matter what.
Well, personally, I would laugh at them, and if it's any consolation to you, more people read the back of the breakfast cereal packets in a medium-sized city in China than read the Wall Street Journal. But it's not just, of course, COVID. Let's take big tech, for example. The world has been treated to scare stories for the last couple of years that companies like Huawei or TikTok provided a back door, they called it, out of which China could extract secrets and personal data about people. But it turns out, as we now know from the Twitter files, that the CIA and the FBI were not just in the back door, but the front door, and coming through every window of everything you ever wrote or ever read on any of the Western big tech platforms. It takes your breath away, this level of hypocrisy.
Exactly. You mentioned Twitter file. I think Elon Musk published Twitter file, and we didn't see all these major Western mainstream media who claim they love defending freedom and democracy to report this, right? No major media report this Twitter file, and they crazily attacking Chinese companies or companies from any country that they don't like, of spying, stealing their customers' information. But I think the institution from the UK did a thorough investigation and found no proof that Huawei was stealing their information. On the other hand, what we do know is basically all the United States big companies, social platforms, all the companies you know, did steal information from every country, and even their presidents, Angela Merkel, all these people. And it seems like Europe or all their Western allies are suddenly okay. and they're okay. The United States stealing their president's information. Like, huh? So it's definitely double standards. And I think I also saw this because several Western mainstream media recently crazily publishing some stories. They used satellite images they took of the crematoriums and the funeral homes in China, because those images you see people packed at those places, and they want to show that the death numbers in China are way higher than they announced. But the thing is, there's a big problem with their story is that first, winter sees excessive death, excessive mortality rate across the world because people with cardiovascular diseases, with weakened bones, especially the elderly, are more likely to pass away in winter. So we need to be careful. And also we have flu and COVID can also kill more people during the winter times. So, and also when they compare the images, they didn't especially China now is in a very cold winter, and they didn't compare the winter death in different years. They didn't compare whether those places are also packed in previous winters. And they just announced that all the deaths in China are due to COVID. Like they have more authorities than doctors. So I don't, it's hilarious when they talk about China, suddenly their common sense, all their values and standards suddenly gone. And also you mentioned Twitter, something very important, because I think, George, you and I both being heavily attacked and being labeled by this state-affiliated media on Twitter. And even before, I was heavily attacked by several think tank and the U.S. mainstream reporters, because they think I was like not telling my own opinions. I was controlled. I was just propaganda mouthpiece, and they want to kick me out of Twitter. I think the label thing is really trying to limit our traffic and kick us out of Twitter. And the think tank in Australia called ASPI, Australia Strategic Partner Institute. I think, I'm not sure whether I got the name right, ASPI. So they write so many reports analyzing all the accounts from China, from Russia, whether they are linked, whether they're coordinated, whether they're real people. But when Elon Musk released Twitter file, once again, they went silent. Turned out they are the Twitter police. They are using their Twitter to spy on us.
Yes, and of course the media are not just ignoring the Twitter files. Where they're not ignoring it, they're attacking the journalists who are writing up the Twitter files to discourage anyone else from doing so. I'm not just labeled, I am shadow banned. A good friend of mine, Manila Chan, just told me an hour ago that if you type in the word George, if you type in the word George Galloway on Twitter, you cannot find me. Just as I cannot find you when I tried to tag you in to Twitter. So they have actually disappeared me on Twitter. And I still have 446,000 followers, but only about 10% of them ever see anything that I write. And that's on Twitter. That's on Elon Musk's Twitter, which is why I'm in court, which is why this mother of all talk shows is important. I hope you'll find me a Chinese sponsor for the midweek show. I'm badly in need of it. There's only one aspect of hypocrisy that I still have time to raise with you. It is this jealousy, the jealous X that you were talking about. Brussels in Belgium is the headquarters of both the EU and NATO. But it was also the headquarters of the heart of darkness that Joseph Conrad wrote about. It was also the empire, King Leopold, that E.D. Morel and Roger Casement exposed. for the most, and there's a lot of competition in this, but for the most heinous crimes of colonialism in Africa. Into the 1950s, they still chopped people's hands off for not reaching their rubber quotas. They chopped people's penises off in the Belgian Congo. They murdered the president of the Congo, Patrice Lumumba, and dismembered him, boiled him in acid in the Belgian Congo. And yet now NATO and the EU are both mounting fits of jealousy about China's entirely benign influence in Africa. Instead of chopping people's hands off in Africa, China is giving those hands work in Africa to build airports and highways and ports and infrastructure. How's that for hypocrisy?
Exactly. And what I mentioned about that joke, the jealous acts, is so true because probably if any viewers are paying attention to the global news, these like countries in Africa and in Latin America are slowly are more willing to work with China under the Belt and Road Initiative. And they have a much better relationship because China respects their sovereignty, does not interfere in the internal affairs. So when they see like China is getting, or Africa, their former colonies, or the Latin American countries and the Caribbeans, their former colonies, or the United States always call their backyard, are having a cozy relationship with China, they suddenly like, no, they go to those regions to lecture those people, do not work with China, do not do this. And I think this year in 2022, there's a summit of the Americas, and just last month, they also have the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. But the thing is, I mean, to quote a quote from former Chile ambassador to China, is like, whenever U.S. politicians came to Latin America, they talk about China. Whenever Chinese politicians came to Latin America, all they talk about is businesses and corporations. Same with Africa. All the Chinese delegations and the African delegations talk about is businesses, deals, agendas. What can we benefit? What can we achieve? But you see from the recent the U.S. Africa Leader Summit, there's no achievable goals, and there's no and. Just completely different. And they are talking about what we can do, not what we can do for Africa, but what we can do with Africa, which is apparently to reduce China's influence in the world. So and then according to African researcher that I recently interviewed, and she said, and even the African leaders were not consulted prior to the summit. But on the contrary, in the past few decades, the teams from multiple African countries and China are having regular meetings, summits. The leaders from all these countries met with each other, discussed all the plans to check whether all those plans and goals are going as designed. And also remember, every year Chinese foreign ministers' first overseas visit is always Africa, multiple African countries. And this has been happening for 33 years. So this is the respects that many countries in the global south felt they have never been given, never felt like the global north given them. But China have been working with them and giving them this respect for decades. So I think instead of trying to badmouth China with their counter-China influence fund, to lecture those people, do not work with China. Maybe those people should reflect what they did wrong. Why those people, if there's any debt trap, why those countries are still willing to choose debt trap than choosing you? And like you said, George, like even though we are all shadow banned by Twitter, but still we got lots of followers. So instead of attacking us, those journalists with Western mainstream media, they should think why people don't trust them anymore. why, even though with this label, even though they write so many hit pieces towards us, there are still lots of people following us, want to hear us. They still think our voice is more true. And so why? They should reflect themselves rather than attacking us. It's like keeping your enemies down, but rather than keeping themselves strong.
Well said, and a very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us, as always, Li Jingjing, the celebrated Chinese television and journalistic presenter and analyst. The poll has gone overwhelmingly against Joe Biden, but you've still got half an hour or so to cast your vote. Tony is in Liverpool. Very nice to talk to one of my most favourite cities in the world. Tony, what would you like to say?
Obviously, we've all seen the events which are happening in the past 48 hours in Solidar and ongoing in Bakhmut. And I think the appointment of General Valery Gerasimov tonight as the overall theatre commander is very important, because he's a combined forces commander, as opposed to General Surovikin, who was an aerospace and space force commander, as we saw in the Syrian campaign, which he devised the air campaign there, and likewise he's devised the air campaign, which we've seen over the past couple of months, taking out the critical infrastructure in Ukraine. So I think that does indicate now that it's highly likely that we will see a ground campaign beginning imminently, particularly with the weather now. The ground is obviously starting to freeze, and it will probably take another week or two before it completely freezes. You need the black soil, the top 15 feet of black soil. But I do think the appointment tonight of General Gerasimov is very, very important, and I think people in NATO, in all of the capitals around NATO nations, Washington, London in particular, they will be very, very aware of General Gerasimov and the appointment.
Well, I think that's very shrewd observation, Tony. The ground war offensive that MI6 are predicting is, of course, doesn't take much of a crystal ball. The appointment of Gerasimov, the build-up of ground forces in Belarus makes it obvious that either one or all five of the main fronts will very soon, I don't think in weeks, I think in days, be subject to a massive Russian advance, and the ability of the armed forces of Ukraine, whose soldiers have fought extremely bravely, if in an ignoble cause for an ignoble regime. The individual soldiers of the Ukraine have fought very bravely, but they cannot fight on. General Winter is on the battlefield. General Gerasimov is on the battlefield. It's 49 degrees below, with intense frost and ice on the battlefield, and the highly mechanized Russian armed forces, now 600,000 strong in the Ukraine, are about to roll over the NATO armies and their mercenaries there. And none of this needed to happen. There could have been a Christmas truce. Zelensky refused it. There could have been a settlement in May. Boris Johnson scuppered it. There could have been no Russian invasion at all on the 25th of February if the Minsk II agreements signed by Ukraine, guaranteed by Germany and France, had been implemented. There could have been no conflict in Ukraine at all if the European Union and the United States had not overthrown the elected government in Ukraine in 2014. There needed to be no animus at all between Ukraine and Russia if it had not been hand-picked by NATO as the front to confront Russia in defiance of the promises made. Thanks to Henry Kissinger, we now know beyond any contradiction at all made to Gorbachev at the point of his agreement to withdraw from East Germany. A promise from the United States that NATO would not enlarge 1 inch to the east of Germany if he would let the wall come down. So the promises of the United States, the guarantees of Germany and France are worthless. And so, as Putin put it, just I think yesterday or the day before, this matter will now have to be settled by the army, will now have to be settled on the battlefield. And the terms available to end this war are now incomparable to the terms that were available at all points up until now. Tony, thanks for that call. Fox News is reporting right now, Joe Biden aides have found a second batch of classified documents being kept at a different location in addition to the ones discovered earlier this week at Joe Biden's think tank office. A second investigation has been launched. I must say, if ever there was an oxymoron, it has to be Joe Biden's think tank. Donald is in Inverness. Let's hear from him. Donald, welcome.
Good evening, George, to your College of Knowledge is filling us in again on so many different things.
Thank you.
Following on last week's talk, where you were speaking about the sexualization of children with what's being taught in schools, one of your correspondents, you were asking, he said to him, keep guessing, trying to work out what's going on here. And one of Robert from Oregon last week said that he thought this was an international thing. And indeed, it must be an international thing because it's happening all over the place. And, with many of these campaigns, what happens is it's like going for the low-lying fruit. Whoever is behind these things, they pick off a particular area of the world or a particular council or something like that, and they try to get it passed through there, and then they keep on bootlegging that somewhere else. Now, going back historically, I mean, people are becoming familiar with this phrase about minor attracted adults. It's come into public cognizance in the past year or so in this part of the world. But it actually began over in America as the American Psychiatric Association. They produce a sort of dictionary of all the sort of different psychiatric conditions that you can have. And indeed, you and I are probably diagnosed with having something in that book. So they diagnose all sorts of things, and they came up with this expression, the minor attracted adults. The point being that they say that this is normal. It's a normal behavior, that these are people who function quite normally in public life when they do this and they do that and they do the next thing. So they're normal people, but they have got this minor attraction to children. It's a bit similar, like saying, well, a thief or an adulterer are normal people, but they've got this attraction to thieving or whatever. And so that what we've actually got here is you've got academics, you've got whole institutions, and the American Psychiatric Association is a very big thing. And these things are circulating around the world. And no matter what our doctrine in this country may be, you'll find, I think it was yesterday I heard about Kemi Badenoch, the Tory MP. She's got to make up her mind whether these gender reassignment factors, not just in this country, but what is done in another country, and whether we can accept and whether we can endorse what's done in these other countries. So it's almost as if we elect politicians to look after the affairs of this country. But these politicians are now being hamstrung by what's being done in other countries. And these things now circulating back upon us. And so this needs to be looked at from almost from an international point of view, and that's why when Robert from Oregon said that last week, I have to agree. And there's lots of different things where this is happening. Take for instance euthanasia, where you've got some states in America, and this is the point, they pick off one at a time. Then you've got stopping people praying for changing their the conversion therapy in Victoria in Australia. There's a law already been passed whereby you're not allowed to teach these things, and the state is going to teach ministers what they can say. And because it happens in one part of the world, they then start using that to try to influence other parts of the world. And so that's just my penny's worth that I'm throwing into what is going on, although I see it personally as a general attack on the family. If I can now concentrate on what's going on in schools, about almost separating children from their parents. You pointed out the fact that the parents might not even know that this is being said to the children they've had in schools. And this is a separating, in spite of having a European Convention on Human Rights where you've got the rights of the family, grandparents don't have the access to their own grandchildren, according to the law that we have now. And now we've got the parents being separated from the children. And this is undermining an awful lot of things. Now, if you're a teacher and you're in a school and you're presented with all these things, we've got a problem right now in our country, people going on strike and saying that doctors and nurses and teachers, they can't get recruitment. Well, who wants to become a doctor or a nurse or a teacher if you can't even say that a man's a man or a woman's a woman? And who would want to go into those professions where your whole thinking is being controlled by the state in this way?
Well, quite so. Well, I don't know any doctor that would accept the diktat of the state, still less actually any minister that would be told by the state what to say. They could scarcely call themselves a minister of God if man was ordering them what to say. That was a very profound call, Donald, and I'm very grateful for it. There's a big demonstration at noon tomorrow in Edinburgh outside the Scottish Parliament protesting about the particular and particularly bizarre lacunae which Scotland has become in these controversies. San Francisco, okay, you know, but anyone who knows Scotland as you and I do, this douce, wee Presbyterian country, which has become the Las Vegas of the elimination of women, of the separation of parents from their children, of the celebration of children being pushed down these bizarre, peculiar byways of gender reassignment, hormones, beta blockers, and all the foul propaganda given to small primary school children without their parents' agreement or even knowledge that all this should be happening in Scotland, that Murray Shire, next to you in Inverness, should be the Las Vegas of this sexual license, is one of the most inexplicable phenomena that I have experienced in a long life in Scotland. Donald, thank you for all of that. Now, I'm in Sunderland on the 7th of February. I did a great interview with the local radio there, Nova Radio, I think it's called, last night. I'm grateful to them for that. I made the point on that radio station that if you're unemployed or if you're an old age pensioner, or if you're just literally unable to pay for the ticket, then contact the venue and they will sort you out with a free ticket complimentary from me and Gayatri. But more than half of the tickets have already been sold. February 7th is still a month or so away. It's in Sunderland on February the 7th, the Moats Roadshow. Gayatri will be filming at it, interviewing the people in the audience. We'll show some of those interviews in the subsequent edition of the Mother of All Talk Shows. I'll be talking about times past, times now, and the future that we need to build. And talking, of course, about the show. So please get along to the Moats Roadshow in Sunderland on the 7th of February. Eric is in London, wants to talk about Bernie Sanders.
And thank you again for inviting me on your show. I wanted to ask you, I'm a big fan of Bernie Sanders, and I believe his politics is similar to yours in a sense that he very much believes in Medicare for all, a fairer society in America. He also supported Mick Lynch with the train strikes. He came down, and he's very pro-Palestine, very sympathetic. He said that NATO were too strong. And I believe his type of politics are quite similar to yours. And I think he's a fantastic man. And he wants a much more fairer society in America, much fairer. And he said that things like Medicare is a human right, good education, all that. Yeah, on your show, I don't know, a few weeks ago, you weren't very complimentary about him. And you didn't think it was all that great. So I just really like to know why.
Well, he let us all down, Eric. I'll go further. Bernie Sanders betrayed us all, because all of those things you said he believes, he has not stood firm on. And he has given his support to the defense budget, nearly $1 trillion defense budget, which goes to prosecute NATO wars. He stood up for the train drivers, but supported the government of Joe Biden in crushing the train drivers. He was supposedly the leader of a blue-collar, progressive revolt inside the Democratic Party, but he allowed the Democrats, of which he's not even a member, by the way, to fit him up, not once, but twice, when they cheated him out of the nomination as Democratic nominee for president. So he's a coward without a backbone. He speaks with forked tongue. He says one thing but does another. He talks left but acts right. And above all, he therefore provides cover for the Biden crime family and the great crimes that it is committing against the people of the United States and against the people of the world. So I despise him because he was a false prophet. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing, which of course is worse than being a wolf. It's being a wolf that pretended to be a sheep. And therefore I took his picture down from our Hall of Fame. I literally took it down. Bernie Sanders betrayed us all. And it's a very good lesson that we must not listen to what people say. We should study what they do. And those false prophets should be shunned. I'm sorry to disappoint you, Eric, in London. Back to the YouTube comments. The happy little fox, a.k.a. Benji. We all live under the same sky, but we don't all have the same horizon, which is a quote from Konrad Adenauer, not a person I've ever quoted on air before. And you have to be a certain age to even know who Konrad Adenauer is. Stratacat 2000 says, Europe is moving back to the ancient times of barbaric tribes. And Boca Janduma says, Vicky Newland has Zelensky by the cojones. And John Smith says, I damn love that you just endorsed Door 24, George. He'd be a great candidate, actually a politician that cares about people and making positive change. I love Jimmy Dore. I hope he runs in 24. Michael in Minneapolis, who tried to tag me on Twitter and discovered it's no longer possible. I'm not making that up. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, George, I attempted to tag you this week, and I was shown all of the George Galloway parody accounts, of which there are a decent amount, but I was completely unable to tag you. I tried on different devices several times. So that's not the thrust of my call, but that is true, and it is impossible to tag you, and it's kind of a disturbing thing, really.
Unbelievable.
Anyway.
Disturbing, very, very disturbing. Because, not least because I've got 446,000 followers. I got 2,000 new followers in the last 24 hours. Imagine how many I'd have if I wasn't being shadow banned.
True. It is terrible. And whatever's going on over at Twitter, they need to figure it out because it's a big problem. That is for sure. So what I called, though, about is this spectacle in the United States with the Speaker of the House. It took the longest amount of time to vote in a new speaker that it's taken since the 50s. And, George, I'm talking about the 1850s here. It took 15 votes for Kevin McCarthy to win the speakership for the Republicans. 15 votes. And the important thing here is that the Republicans are in the exact same spot the Democrats were in 2 years ago. They have a very slim majority, so that means that any small group of members could have an outsized influence. And the far-right Republicans got an unbelievable amount of concessions, George. They got control of several committees and subcommittees out of that. They put in a rule that says if the debt ceiling's raised, they must be accompanied with spending cuts, which, if that is kept to, would cause a $75 billion cut in the defense budget in 2 years. So that's something to pay attention to. They are voting on appropriation bills separately rather than one omnibus spending bill. And now one single member can call for essentially for a vote on whether a speaker remains or stays. I mean, I could go on and on. I'll stop you, but you get the idea. They got a ton of votes.
Well, Michael, I'll tell you what. No, I got it. Michael, imagine if Sanders and AOC and Omar and all these bomb squatters, imagine if they had used their congressional power in the way that the right-wing Trumpists and the Republicans have used theirs, the concessions that they could have forced, but didn't have the guts, the moral fiber to do so. Thanks for your call. I've got to make way, though, because there's a legend on the line. It's Norma in Bristol. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. I only wanted to make a couple of points. Li Jingjing, I think she's brilliant, you know. We learned so much about her, well, about what things that she says, that we'd never hear from anybody else. I mean, she really is a tonic, isn't she?
She's wonderful. She is, if the sun is rising in the east, she is one of the brightest rays of sunshine. That's why they make it so hard for her to be found on social media.
Oh, you know, you'd never hear anything like that only on your program. Then the other thing I was going to say was, do you think you'll be able to get another venue for your No to NATO, No to War? Do you think you'll get another one?
Yes, I'm absolutely sure that we will, but for understandable reasons, I don't want to announce anywhere right now, because the same forces that acted to get the previous venue banned will immediately move into action. So we'll keep the new venue, date, time, etc., as much to ourselves as we can. We'll give the zone, and then we'll, at the last minute, announce the venue. And we'll make sure that it is copper-bottomed. But it's come to something, isn't it, Norma, that two distinguished members of the European Parliament, Claire Daly and Mick Wallace, the distinguished American, from a distinguished member of the political aristocracy in the United States, Max Blumenthal, Anya Parampil, two members, former members of the British Parliament, Chris Williamson, and me, the deputy leader of ASLEF, the train drivers union, Low Key, the highly popular entertainer and political activist, Craig Murray, the honourable former British ambassador, Peter Ford, the honourable former British ambassador. That's who the panel were. And they can't find, even when they pay for it, a space to speak in central London, to make their case. And we're supposed to be a free country, Norma. We're supposed to be a democracy. We're supposed to be the free world. And worse than that, the Labour Party danced publicly on the grave of the venue and the meeting, rejoicing that freedom of speech and freedom of assembly in the British capital had been so crudely crushed as a result of pressure. And we're supposed to believe that it would be a good idea to give these people a parliamentary majority. No thanks. A Blair-Starmer government would be the most serious threat to liberty that ever existed in this country of ours. Unfortunately, Norma, that's all I've got time for. I don't even have time to sum up the show. And so all that remains is for me to invite you all back again on Sunday evening at 7 p.m. UK time for the mothership, for the show that will never go down, for the curtain that will never fall, the mother of all talk shows, on Sunday night at 7 p.m. UK time. And please, please sponsor the midweek show before we lose it. Thanks for joining me on the mother of all talk shows.